Well, welcome to the Connect Church Discipleship Podcast. We are now in season 2, episode 13. And this season, we're talking about spiritual disciplines and ordinances that are a part of the life of a disciple of Christ. And today, we're going to kick off a new series on stewardship, and we'll look specifically at the aspect of time. I want to introduce our guest with you today. Carlton is no stranger to us on the podcast. He's been with us before, one of our Connect group leaders within our church. And today we welcome in Ken for the very first time on the podcast. You're going to get to see him a lot over the next few episodes. And he's part of the finance team at our church. He's part of our welcome team. He's a Dodgers fan, so we'll add that in there as well. But he's also living the dream for us. He's taking somebody through Pipeline. Go back and listen to the trailer from season 1. I'll throw that in here again. But he's walking somebody through this and growing. So, gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to be here today. I appreciate that. Awesome. So we're talking about ordinances and spiritual disciplines. And just a reminder, we've been saying that these are ways to be formed by Christ. We don't do these things to check a box or to become righteous in any way, but we do this so that the Lord can work in our lives to help us know him more. And so I'm going to define stewardship very quickly. Stewardship means to be a caretaker. And the illustration I think of, I don't know if either of you have ever had to borrow somebody's car before, but I've noticed my driving habits change. I actually drive the speed limit. I'm not, hands are 10 and 2, I'm not trying to put a scratch. I got to give it back because I know it doesn't belong to me. And I like that idea of what God has given to us doesn't belong to us. We could think it does, but it really belongs to him. And so, Carlton, would you read for me Psalm 24, 1, as we kind of just look at some scriptural context for that?
Certainly, Psalms 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it.
Awesome. So, being good stewards, we realize everything belongs to the Lord, and so it's all temporary for us, which also tells us that there's a greater kingdom to which we hold alliance to, right? Jesus in Matthew 6, he talks about, store up treasure in heaven where moth and rust and all this doesn't destroy. So there's something beyond this that we should be laboring for. And if we think about everything, right, our tech gadgets will eventually be useless. Our home, somebody else will live there at some point, that kind of thing. And so we don't own this. And so as disciples, we want to be focused on the kingdom of God. And so we're going to look at this idea of stewardship in the areas of our time, our talent, and our treasure. But today for our time. But before we get into time specifically, why would we say that stewardship is a spiritual discipline? We may not always lump it in with, we would think prayer, fasting, like that kind of stuff. Why would stewardship be a spiritual discipline?
Well, I think a key reason that I believe it's a spiritual discipline is that goes back to the fact that we're by nature very selfish beings. So I think it takes spiritual discipline to acknowledge that everything belongs to God and not to us.
Absolutely, it's good.
Right, yeah. I think when I hear this question, I think that I would kind of frame it a little different. That stewardship is also a spiritual discipline because I feel that we are physically aware of stewardship way before we come spiritually aware of
Sure.
of stewardship. And the same way that you mentioned, we may borrow someone's car, or maybe if you've spent time babysitting a sibling or someone younger, you become aware of how to take care of something, right?
Sure.
How to be that caretaker. And so I just as you mentioned earlier, I think that it must be a spiritual discipline and become a spiritual discipline in our lives because, as you mentioned, the spiritual is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And the physical is only temporary.
Yeah. And I think kind of I heard in both you guys' answers, there's this idea that like we need to be drawn back to that over and over again, right? Because it's easy to kind of forget that. And so I love that. Well, let's talk about time in that aspect. Psalm 90:12 says this: "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And so, what we give our days to, how we spend our time, it matters, right? We're not just checking off days on the calendar. And I even heard someone say once that our currency is probably time more than it is physical money, right? We all want more time, that's just so valuable to us. We know that this world lives very hurried lives. Why do you think that is? Why do we maybe have trouble slowing down and we're always on the go and those types of things?
Well, I think I have found that there is just not enough hours in a day to get done the things that I have on my calendar. And so what ends up happening is things that I intend to get done get pushed off to the next day. And then that just becomes a cycle leading me to definitely live a hurried life.
Absolutely.
I think just to piggyback on Carlton, and often I think sometimes we get our priorities misaligned, which then leads us to chasing after the things that our culture says are important, or how it actually defines success. So I think there's a little bit of misalignment of priorities that kind of leads to that hurriedness.
Absolutely. So it's so easy for us to get off track, right? We could start on track one day and then be off very easily. So if we're going to apply this, then what would it look like for a disciple of Jesus to steward their time? What are maybe some of the ways that they would do that? Maybe what would contribute to the decisions that they make, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, a couple things I had kind of thought of was, we need to purposely and regularly set aside time to be with God, whether it's in the Word, in prayer, and then secondly, I think learning to say no. Oftentimes we're even in a church where we want to be helpful, we want to serve, we want to be, but I think we need to learn to say no so that we can avoid the trap of busyness.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good.
Right. And I think also trying to be consistent with checking in with God and presenting our schedules to Him, I think is a big part of that as well.
Yeah, that's a real challenge, right? Like I think how often do I really do that? How often am I like, all right, Lord, like, what do you want to do today? Like I'm just like, this is what I got to get done, right? And it could even be things for the kingdom, right? But we don't take that time. So that's super important. Something that Pastor Frank brought out on this on a recent message he shared was even extending it beyond just the church context, right? Like taking a Sabbath, right? You were talking about saying no to things, right? Even taking a Sabbath is a way to steward our time, right? And taking it outside of a regular church context as well. Awesome. So imagine that you're working with somebody or you're discipling somebody and they're trying to figure out, is God redirecting their time and trying to get them to steward their time differently, or it's just their own thoughts and they're overthinking things? How would you counsel them in that?
Well, first I look at how I look to myself on a question like that. And while that's a difficult question to tackle, what I would say is I try to look at are there any people or are there any things being hurt or harmed by my schedule? Right?
Yeah.
Because God does not want us to hurt or harm anyone or anything with our schedule, whether that be the kingdom of God, the church, the ministry, or our families and our home life.
Sure.
Right. And so it requires delicate balance, which we need the wisdom of God for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think also getting back to my earlier point about us being selfish beings, I think one way we can know that it's God directing our time is if the time is being shifted to serving others or to serving God in some way, then it's probably Him directing us versus our own thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great test. That's a great test. So what are maybe some other ways that we can also measure if someone wants to know, like, hey, am I doing this well? What would you say to them? What are some ways they can measure that? Maybe questions they could ask. What would that look like?
I think one thing is if we're continually tired, and even the things that we normally enjoy doing are bringing us happiness, we're probably not stewarding our time very well.
That's a good point.
Wow.
Good point.
Very good point. Yeah. I would probably say I always look for the fruit. Is there is there fruit being produced from what I'm putting my time toward?
Yeah.
And if it's not, I tend to find that the time is usually being spent idle.
Yeah. Those are two excellent questions. I love it. And I feel like that could apply to any season of life that people bring those questions that you guys ask. So that's awesome. One more question on stewardship, and then we'll ask you a get to know you question today. And so we talked about how we live these hurried lives. Maybe there's somebody that says, hey, I want to steward my time for the Lord, but I just, whether it's my job is very demanding or raising kids or caring for parents, maybe, or fill in the blank, whatever it is. It's just something that's really eating their time is just, it's just too much. What would you say to them? How would you encourage them? What advice would you give them of how they could still steward their time, even in that season of life that might be difficult?
Well, my question to them would first be, why do you think you're not stewarding your time for the Lord by doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're caring for home and you're caring for those who have cared for you. So first I would try to encourage them in understanding that they are stewarding their time well.
Yeah.
Right. And just in being in that season. And please also understand that that is just the season.
Yeah. So there's a big perspective shift that sometimes needs to happen of how we view stewardship, right? Specifically with time, which is good. Ken, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would basically tell them, welcome to the club. And like Carlton said, that every season is different, and stewarding your time is going to look different in that. And basically just encourage them that, be flexible, but be intentional with spending time with God. It's going to look different when you're retired, like I am. It's a lot easier than when I was working 60 hours a week and trying to raise 3 kids. So, give yourself a little break, but just be intentional.
Yeah. I like what you said, right? You got to adjust for the seasons of what that is. And that's probably a regular question that we have to ask ourselves. What does it look like in this season, in this moment? So awesome. So we got some ways that we could go and steward our time now as disciples, and maybe even ask ourselves some evaluation questions, which is good. But we want to give the audience an opportunity to get to know you guys better. And so we're stealing the question from Pastor Frank now. None of us really have much clarity on this question. So we've been told you could take it however you want, whatever direction you want. So basically the question is dinosaurs or geese?
I'll say dinosaurs.
I will also say dinosaurs because I played on too many baseball or soccer fields where geese have been present. I'll leave it at that.
Right. I guess if a dinosaur was present, the game would be over.
That would be a problem.
So we don't have to worry about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Audience, thank you for being with us as well. This is a good spot to maybe text your discipler. Let them know something you learned in this video, maybe a way that you are stewarding your time or maybe need to steward your time, and then come back for our next episode as we talk about stewarding our talents. Have a great day, everyone.